On behalf of the Atlanta Global Studies Center and the Center for Urban Language Teaching and Research, I'd like to welcome you to GSU's Global Career Series. This series brings together globally minded organizations to talk to students about the rewarding opportunities that await them. I'm Christy Winkler, and I'm the Managing Director of CULTR, also known as the Center for Urban Language Teaching and Research. And I am very excited to be here today, and we are very fortunate that we have two wonderful speakers, Ms. Ana Soler from SeSo Incorporated, and Jessica Sanchez, who is a bilingual interpreter from Arkansas. They are here with us today to talk about internships, global skills, professional development, and employment opportunities in the field of translation and interpretation. I will tell you a little bit about them, and you may have more questions at the end. So first, Ana is the founder and CEO of SeSo Incorporated, a source of professional development opportunities for interpreters and for organizations seeking customized cultural humility and family engagement trainings. She completed her degree in social work here at Georgia State University, her master's degree in public health at Emory University, and is a PhD in special education at the University of Georgia. For over a decade, Ana worked with the largest school district in Georgia as the Language Services and Parent Outreach Coordinator, developing and implementing professional development opportunities for bilingual and bicultural individuals, as well as discovering endless opportunities to engage English learner parents in their children's education. Ana has authored interpreter training curricula nationally, including the Intercultural Parent and Youth Leadership Program, the Interpretation Academy for Bilingual High School Students, the Arkansas Interpreter in Education Credential Training, which is a 40-hour course for medical interpreters, and 3 online courses for the University of Georgia, including the Professional Interpreter in Education Certificate course and the Professional Interpreter in Special Education Certificate course. She remains an active medical and educational interpreter and translator. And now for our second speaker, Jessica Sanchez is an Arkansas bilingual interpreter credentialed in education and works as a special education interpreter and translator for various language service agencies across the nation. Her goal is to provide parents, guardians, and community members with the information and tools they need to aid their children to success through clear and concise interpretation and translation. Before I turn it over to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, this session is being recorded and will be made available after the session at some point. We ask that you keep your mics muted to reduce any noise during the presentation. So both of our speakers will speak, and then there will be about a 15 or 20 minute section for Q&A after the presentations. So feel free to type your questions in the chat at any time. And then if you're interested in doing so, we'd like to have you turn on your microphone and your camera and ask those questions when we get to the Q&A. Thank you all for being here. And now I will turn it over to our esteemed speakers. Ana, I think you're going to begin.
Well, thank you very much, Christy, and thank you to Georgia State University. I love coming back home. Really, I had a wonderful, wonderful time at Georgia State University, and I just love being able to give back a little bit of the education I got here. So thank you for the invitation, and it is truly an honor for me to be here today. So again, my name is Ana Soler, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the world of interpreters and translators. And I'm hoping that this is a very interactive session, more of a conversation with you about the field of interpretation and translation. So this is a little bit of a background about the things that we do at SeSo Incorporated. So a lot of it started out of my own experience, first as an English learner. That was my first exposure to interpretation, as I'm sure many of you have had that experience of interpreting for your own families and your own communities. So all of that really led to the creation of an organization that could provide the foundation for interpreters, specifically in the area of education. My first exposure to interpretation was in the medical field. And so I felt a little bit more supported there. When I moved to the educational field, not so much. And so my goal has been to really create the framework for this profession of interpreters as in the educational setting. So I'm hoping to kind of give you a good overview of different types of interpretation, and also provide you with some tools to continue learning, right? Because it's definitely a lifelong lesson in terms of interpretation. So, but this is a little bit about me. As Christy mentioned, I've had quite a bit of personal and professional experience in this. This is really my passion. It's no longer my job. I think that it's highly, something. Language access is definitely something that we all need and that our families deserve. So in everything that I do, we've been able to kind of collaborate with different organizations to create some framework for this profession, specifically in terms of interpreters and education. But really the bottom line of this slide is that I'm still interpreting and I'm still translating. Because it's never ending. And so I'm hoping that throughout this conversation that we have together, that you keep that in mind. Even if you have taken a course in interpretation or you know a little bit about the interpretation world, just keep in mind that this is a lifelong learning experience, that you're never stop learning. So I'm hoping that we are able to provide you with some of the tools to be able to do that. So. But before I start with our conversation, I'd like to know a little bit about you and kind of get to know how much you know about the benefits of being bilingual, first of all, because in order to be an interpreter, you have to be fully bilingual in at least, 2 languages, English being one of them. So if you can write on the chat what you think are the benefits of being bilingual, and let's see what you come up with. So what are some things that you feel are beneficial, or do you think there are any benefits to being bilingual? Let's see what we get. So being able to obtain better opportunities. Yes, it can help you pick up another language slightly better. Very good point. Understanding connections between cultures. Excellent. Let's see, we got one more. It helps you, that's a long one, helps you make linguistic connections between different languages with Romance and Germanic roots. Absolutely. Makes travel easier. Yes, definitely. So lots of many benefits, of course, of being bilingual. If you're not quite bilingual, definitely time to get there, right? Because in order to be an interpreter, you need to be strong in both languages. And absolutely right, Colby, you have various cognitive benefits. So this is not me speaking, this is research that has shown that we tend to be better at multitasking. We tend to, we're constantly working, 1,000 miles an hour, because that's just, the beauty of being bilingual. But we are highly creative. We have, we're more aware of our environment because, we're constantly listening to different sounds and different gestures. We're capturing a lot of information at a time. So it is amazing what goes on in the brain for those who are bilingual. So this is just a kind of a description of everything that goes on just when you're bilingual, but then when you're interpreting, it is a mental workout because you're using every single part of your brain as you interpret information. Just imagine, try to picture this in yourselves, and I'm sure, many of you are interpreters already, but you're taking information in one language, producing it, in a very intelligible way in a second language almost immediately. That takes a lot of brain matter. So I do want to acknowledge that, and I'm hoping that, those of you who have one language that is stronger than the other, that you continue working on that one that you need more help with, right? So that you can become as strong in both languages as possible. But it is definitely a gift. And so, give yourselves a pat in the back if you're fully bilingual, and if not, let's get to work, right? So these are some of the languages that are in most demand. So of course, Spanish is the one that is most in demand, but it doesn't mean that the others are not. So definitely, try to think of some of the languages that you speak right now, and maybe, like somebody said on the chat, pick up another one. You still have time. So brains are always, plastic, right? There are definitely, there's always time to acquire another language. But a couple of you mentioned this, it really sets you apart from your peers when you are bilingual. Most of the jobs, most of the careers do recognize, when somebody comes in with a bilingual skill, because obviously you're able to open a lot more doors, especially in the commerce business areas. You're able to speak to different people. You're able to relate to different cultures, or somebody else mentioned in the chat. So, in terms of jobs and careers, it really definitely opens a lot of doors for you. And now, I think more than ever, employers are seeking that specific skill, that you're able to connect with other cultures, that you're able to build those linguistic bridges. So it's not just about the language, it's about, creating those connections with clients and patients and different populations in other countries. So sometimes they do lead to hiring bonuses. So, it does equal a little bit of an extra boost in terms of financial stability. So not always, we wish it was more, right? But it is definitely something that makes you very, very special. So. But let's talk about the difference between an interpreter and a translator. So once again, on the chat, if you don't mind, write to me what you think is the difference between an interpreter and a translator, or if you feel that they have the same skills and they can both do the same thing, or if they're the same thing. So what do you think? Timing, okay. Good point. Let's see, Elizabeth, would you mind unmuting yourself and telling me a little bit more about that?
It's the same. That interpreting is typically sort of live in the moment, whereas translation could be from something that's been recorded or a different type of broadcast. Or just taking a document that's in and of itself.
Okay. So, and it sounds like, Leonardo, you're saying kind of the same thing, that interpreters is more real-time, translator is more text and materials. Okay, you're getting closer, good. Interpreter, speech, translator, paper. Yes, excellent job. Translator one-way, interpreter two-way. Not so much. So very good job. So you do have the idea, right? So interpreters do relay information verbally from one language to the other. Okay, it could be from English to Arabic, vice versa. Translators also facilitate information, but they do it in a written format. And the reason that we do want to make that distinction is that not everybody can do both. So some folks are truly gifted in a way when they can do both, that they can, verbally interpret information, but they can also learn how to read and write that language, right? So sometimes there are folks who can do both, but let's say that you grew up in the United States, hearing your second language, let's just say that it's Arabic, okay? You learned Arabic from your family, but you're learning English and everywhere else, in your settings, right? So maybe you are a great speaker of Arabic, but you're not able to read and write it because you didn't get that far, okay? So you may not be a good translator, even though you're a great interpreter. So it is important to kind of be aware of your skills and figure out, are you ready to do both? Or do you need to work a little bit more in one area, okay? So somebody was asking who covers recorded videos then? So that would be an interpreter. I'm not sure if you're talking about maybe like a TED Talk. Let's say that somebody needs to interpret a TED Talk simultaneously. So that would be an interpreter. Now, if I provided you with a transcript of the TED Talk, then that will be a translator who would be doing that. So some folks can do both, and in many settings you're hired to do one job, and then all of a sudden you turn to become a translator just by default, which is not always the best. And let me show you why. So these are some examples of things that could happen, right? If you hire somebody that is not as qualified, to do translations, or maybe you use some Google Translate, which in some cases I know it's gotten a whole lot better. I understand that, but you still need to have a human being kind of figure out what some of these terms are. So I will work through some examples, but if you don't speak Spanish, the one on the bottom right, the translation reads something like, no food or babies beyond this point. So they actually translated the word drink as babies, which is, beber should have been the right word, but they translated it as baby. So it could be, definitely troublesome for some folks out there. So, one of the things that we require interpreters to do is to really be honest about your skills. Right? If you're not strong enough in translation, then just say so. Because a lot of interpreters kind of feel like, okay, I'm going to have to do this, even though I'm not qualified. But we do want you to feel kind of empowered to say, I'm not quite ready to do document translations, but I can speak the language just fine. So there are different skills between a translator and an interpreter. Translators love to work by themselves with all their machines and their dictionaries, and sometimes Google Translate when it gets really hairy. So they are definitely person, but you get to work on your own a little bit better. So if that's your personality, this would be the perfect job for you, right? You get to work with your own, sometimes your own staff. Sometimes they have editors. Sometimes they have, this is not my office, by the way, although it could be, definitely. But you get to work with, kind of a team, editors, proofreaders. You love to do research, so it's a different type of personality, if that's your thing, right? Interpreters tend to be more outgoing for the most part, not generalizing, but we have to talk to people. That's part of our job. And yes, it is very helpful to be a strong writer, absolutely. We get to work in many different settings. So it could be education, and that's, I think, the beauty of this job is that you get to meet all kinds of different people. You get to work in healthcare, legal, global engineering. You have pharmaceutical companies who would absolutely love for you to have some kind of, again, connection with different types of customers and people all around the world. Of course, marketing, you have, educational settings, so different types of populations that you get to touch, which is absolutely wonderful. We do make a difference. So, and I think that's the passion that I feel about this job is that, in some settings it's immediate. You actually see a parent's reaction when you come in and explain information that is very complicated. It's like some of the parents just feel like, somebody's here to actually, explain to me what is going on with my child. I mean, there's nothing, better than that, right? You do have interpreters that work in diplomatic settings. I know that many of you are political science majors and international, absolutely perfect setting for you. We have folks who work in the United Nations, lots of different activities. You see some of the interpreters here in those settings that are large settings. They usually work in teams. So one interpreter will not last more than an hour interpreting, because again, interpreting is so taxing to your brain that they need to work in teams. Unfortunately, in some of the other settings like medical, like educational, we wish we had that. Sometimes, our meetings tend to be long and we have to just take it, which takes a lot of stamina from the interpreter side. And of course, we have sign language interpreters, right? I'm speaking mostly about spoken language interpreters right now, but sign language interpreters have been around forever, and they have really paved the way in terms of our career and our code of ethics and things like that. So definitely, we have quite a high demand for sign language interpreters who are also bilingual. So I have in my staff, we have a couple of sign language interpreters who also speak Spanish, and actually I have one who speaks Arabic. So they're able to interpret for hearing impaired families who are not bilingual and maybe their child is hearing impaired. So it's an amazing gift. So sign language interpreting is definitely another option that you can look into. But somebody else mentioned this in the chat, you're building and strengthening cultural bridges. And I think that's the beauty of this profession, is that it's not just about the words, it's the connections that you make with families, which are really, really important. So, but I just want to go over just a couple of things about our code of ethics. So we do have a foundation of basically rules that we follow as interpreters and as educational interpreters, which is kind of our expertise in our organization. We had to adapt a little bit of our code of ethics and standards, and we kind of borrowed a little bit from each of these professions. So from legal, medical, community interpreters, and also sign language, and had to create kind of our own code of ethics. But the bottom line is that we kind of follow the same patterns. So we part of what we have to do is make sure that all of the information that we share with families or with patients is kept confidential. We're not there to share information. We're there to interpret everything that we hear the way that we hear it, in terms of being, a neutral party. So interpreters are not there to provide opinions or suggestions. They're there to communicate information. Cultural piece is very, very important for us. And that professional development means, continuing learning, because we are aware that we are not done learning afterwards. So this is a document that we'll be happy to share with you. This is, we actually just created, well, not just, it's been around for a while, but we just became a nonprofit, and it's a national organization for educational interpreters. So for many years, we've had organizations that are specific for sign language interpreters, for legal, for medical interpreters. So now we have our own for educational interpreters, because we feel that that's an area that was kind of neglected a little bit. And so we feel that our English learner families also deserve the best interpreters they can have. We have a lot of interpreters that work in special education settings, which is an amazingly rewarding field if you ever want to get into that, because again, you get to see the impact of your work. You get to help families who are dealing with a really difficult situation of finding, a child with special needs, and you're there to explain this information and make it a little bit easier, right? So it's an amazing opportunity for many of you. But let me see, I have my screen here and I can't see what the question is. So how do you become an interpreter or translator? So what are some things that you think you should do to become an interpreter and translator? What do you think? So let's write it on the chat. So what do you think you might need to become an interpreter or translator? Certifications, okay. Possibly, yes. What else? So certifications is a good one. Training, definitely. Cultural competency strengthening course definitely will help, right? Because you are dealing with different cultures. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. That's excellent. So certifications. So there are certifications for medical, legal, sign language interpretation, and they have different requirements for each. And I can kind of give you an overview of that in a second. But for educationals, we're working on that. For educational interpreters, we're working on that certification, because it is important to have some standardized training for everybody. Exactly. So that training has to include cultural competency, knowledge of a specific field, obviously, right? If you're working in education, you need to be very knowledgeable of educational terms. If you're working in medical, definitely that needs to be your focus. Yes, Brittany, fluency proficiency, okay? It seems kind of, really? But you have got to start with a proficiency test. So anytime you go for a certification for training, they need to be asking for, some kind of proof that you're fluent in both languages. And this seems to be, kind of like really logical for us, but not always. We have found that in educational settings, for example, the fact that you self-identify as bilingual is enough, right? And we know that doesn't always happen, right? So it is important to have some type of a seal of, or a test or fluency test that you can show folks, look, I am really bilingual. So that definitely is a big requirement that we're asking for. But for translators, a couple of you mentioned this, proficient at reading and writing. You have to be curious about terminology, curious about comparing different types of translations, and really love research, because a lot of what we do is research. Some of the terms that we may find in education or medical conversations are not easily translatable, right? Sometimes we don't have the right terms for that particular word. I was talking to an interpreter who was telling me that in Hmong, they don't have a word for autism. So he has to create a whole description of what this is to be able to communicate with families. So it's not very easy in some languages to be able to, reflect what the other speaker is saying. Self-motivated, good time management. We work with a lot of deadlines, especially if you are a translator. Of course, as an interpreter, yes, speaking the second language, definitely, right? You need to have pretty good memory, because you're capturing a lot of information in your head and then turning it into the other language. You have to be pretty comfortable speaking before large and small groups. Sometimes some of the meetings that we're in, could be pretty large. We've had some virtual graduations lately, so we've had to interpret for those. But sometimes there are parent-teacher conferences, for example, where we have 2 or 3 teachers and then the interpreter. So you have to be very comfortable with people, right? And speaking in front of people. Flexible, anything can happen in a meeting. So you have to kind of take it as it is and go with it. And really willing to learn, always being willing to learn. And I think that's the key to this conversation. So a couple of things that I wanted to keep kind of make you aware or remind you is that, those of you who speak Spanish, and I know in Arabic this is the same situation, but in Spanish I think more, we have lots of different countries where Spanish is spoken, right? So when I tell you that interpreters have to be very accurate, sometimes that's easier said than done, because our Spanish is pretty common. We understand each other, but as many of you know, not every Spanish word may be the same or has have the same connotation as in different countries. So I'm from Colombia. My Colombian Spanish may be a little bit different than Peruvian Spanish, or I may say something that in Colombian Spanish has no meaning or means absolutely nothing. And in Peruvian Spanish, it could be pretty insulting, right? So as an interpreter, you have to be very aware of who you're speaking to and getting to know the families or the patients that you're working with, so that you can connect with, the Spanish that you need to connect with. That also happens with translations. You have to use, some type of a universal Spanish in our case to make sure that everybody is included in that conversation. So being accurate is not as easy as it sounds. Then we have a lot of idioms and expressions, right? That, it could be the doctor that says it, or it could be one of the family. So, imagine trying to interpret or translate some of these, right? Definitely we cannot do it literal translation, because it would not make sense. So part of being an interpreter is really getting to know the language well. And I know that when I was learning English, I came when I was 14 and I spoke no English at all. So a lot of my teachers said, the time when you're going to know that you learn the language is when you understand the idioms. And that is totally true. Even now, I still, I live in the South. I grew up in New York. So in the South, we have a lot of idioms. So I'm still trying to explore a lot of these things. But and you're right, Leonardo, there are no comparison. So as Spanish speakers, for example, we have to figure out, okay, let the cat out of the bag. What is another, expression in Spanish that may equal that, or maybe, have the same message? So we have to do that in a split second. So interpretation is really, really a work of art for sure. So how to become an interpreter and a translator? Read as much as you possibly can about anything. Because even if you're working in a medical setting, something will come up about a recipe, something will come up about nutrition, right? So sometimes we focus on that specific terminology of the field we're working on, but we really actually have to broaden our horizons and really get to know vocabulary from everywhere. Improve both languages, the grammar, the writing, if that's your area of need, then that's something to work on. Travel, hopefully, things will get better and we can start traveling. Definitely immerse yourself in the culture, in the language. If you feel that you're not quite fluent as you want to be, definitely. We're always looking for volunteers. If you ever want to work in a school, they will always love to have you as a volunteer for parent-teacher conferences. If you're bilingual, just making sure that you are honest with your skills and say, okay, simple parent-teacher conferences I can do, but nothing related to special education because that might be too complex. So it is important to kind of keep that in mind. Use music. That's, I think, how I learned English the most. I used to listen to the Beatles and just kind of look at the lyrics to see how they compared to what the person was saying. So just use whatever resources you have. Following movie subtitles can help you kind of practice that interpretation and transferring information from one language to the other, because again, both languages have to be equally strong, okay? All right, and then a couple of more resources for you to explore, and we'll share this link on the chat, but this is what we call a clearinghouse, which is just a database, like a library of information for interpreters and translators. So we have included a lot of different glossaries, slang information and how to interpret some of that. We have included some best practices for interpreters and translators. So nothing here is, nothing here you have to pay for it. Everything is downloadable. There's nothing copyrighted. So it's all, free for all interpreters. This is kind of a selfish clearinghouse, because it's basically for us as interpreters and translators. We needed a hub of information, and that's what this is. So feel free to explore. If you're ever kind of curious about interpreting in educational settings, this is the place to go. Lots of glossaries, not just in Spanish. So we try to really include as many languages as we can. If you have resources, that you can add to this, please do so, because it's about, working with the whole community. So we have, thank you. We have information in Vietnamese, Punjabi, Chinese, lots of different resources for sure. Okay, I'm going to go really fast. So a couple of tips to help you interpret. So if you're interested in interpreting, the best thing to do to start with is interpreting or listening. A lot of it is listening. So for example, if you're interested in learning how to interpret simultaneously, one thing I would do is, if you're listening to a commercial, for example, try to repeat the same words as the person is saying in English, try to repeat them in English. So don't try to interpret at first. So just all you're doing is listening on one language and listening in the other. Then when you feel a little bit more comfortable, then you can start interpreting at the same time. But you have to get to the point where your brain is used to really capturing that information and spitting it out. So there are lots of different tips on the Clearinghouse. We have some video clips that you can use for practicing and recording yourself. Lots of resources in there, okay? And that was a lot of information at once. And I will leave the questions maybe towards the end, so I can give Jessica a chance, but keep writing on the chat and we'll keep track of the questions as we go. So, all right, so Jessica is going to tell us a little bit about her experience as an interpreter and her work.
Thank you again for the invitation. It is an honor to be here. Again, my name is Jessica Sanchez. I am an educational interpreter. I am actually in Arkansas, so hello y'all from Arkansas. I'm actually I work solely remotely. Ever since the pandemic, this is something that has changed. I worked at a public school in the facility before COVID and before the school closures. So this has definitely been a big change for me completely. I mean, like, it has been for everyone, I'm sure, but it has definitely changed the way that I interpret. I usually interpret at school, but I'm going to give you a little bit of information just on my background. I am an ABICE graduate, and that is the Arkansas Bilingual Interpreter Credential in Education. Currently, this is the only credential acknowledged by any educational department. Arkansas is the only state that acknowledges this credential. Like Anna says, we have a long way to go creating a standard for educational interpreters. There is a standard for legal interpreters. There is a standard for medical interpreters, but there is not a standard for educational interpreters. So this is a one step on the right direction. Now I have the opportunity to be a co-facilitator along with Anna, and this has, I learned I think way more from facilitating now from the experiences and the networking that this has brought us. My background is in the medical field. I went to school to be a medical assistant, and this is the area that I worked for almost 7 years in the pediatric field and pediatric mental health. So whenever I started working in the educational field, I thought, you know what, I got this because I'm familiar with psychological reports. I got this. I've seen things like this before. I almost cried after my first interpretation session. It was the terminology was way above way above me. I didn't really know what to expect, and I feel like I was thrown into the wolves. So like a lot of what Anna said, I'm gonna echo through this conversation. It is just so difficult to be thrown, and just because you're bilingual or maybe because you have certain characteristics, to just be thrown into situations and to just have that expectation that, oh yeah, you must know it. But maybe I've only worked in shipping and I know all the shipping terms, but I have no idea of any of these cooking terms. So this is pretty much how it went. I have had the opportunity to interpret for over 1,400 special education meetings. So throughout that, I have had many hours of experience, and my brain sometimes ends up a little bit scrambled. But with the pandemic, I have had to transition to remote interpretation. The modes of remote interpretation that are used is OPI or BRI. OPI, over the phone interpretation. BRI, video remote interpretation. The one that we use the most as an interpreter is a video remote interpretation. And I say as an interpreter because sometimes on the other line, for me, because all my interpretation really is for special education, the parent will be connecting just by the phone. So maybe the phone for the parent is OPI, while for me it's BRI because I do have all the staff on my screen. Some of the points that I wanted to address regarding video remote interpretation, it's a little bit different compared to working for a school because as a private contractor, you do have to have your own equipment. So things that you have to have, part of your equipment obviously will be like your computer, your a headset. It is detrimental, especially with a noise canceling headset with a USB cord, because you do not want to add any static or just losing connectivity, because we already have issues. You might lose connectivity through your internet, so you do not want to add any more issues in the future. Also, you're going to need a good, reliable webcam, just good internet connection, good lighting. Your environment should be a quiet place in a well-lit place. Also, something with a clear background, something that is not going to have distractions or it's going to take away from your interpretation. As let me see. Sorry, I lost myself a little bit there. So those are another thing that is really, really important is going to be a notebook. You always have to have a notebook with you, even though you are interpreting. Note taking is going to be one of those skills that you will have to develop. You will have to create like pretty much shorthand. You will create your own abbreviations. What are you most familiar with? What are the terms that you're using more often? Create your own symbols, because a lot of the interpretation that you are going to be taking care of, it's going to be consecutive. So you're going to be taking turns. So usually whenever you're in person, you can do simultaneous interpretation or consecutive interpretation. So interpreting for a special education meeting can have a lot of members. If you are familiar with special education, it could really have a lot of different members. I know I'm repeating myself, but for example, we can have the school psychologist, we can have someone from administration, we're going to have the parent, we're going to have the student, we can also have some occupational therapist, a physical therapist, speech therapist, if there's a behavior plan, maybe a behavior analyst as well. So an advocate, so there can be many members. So you will be interpreting for all these different people, and you have to become very familiar with the terminology for all of these different specialties. So with that said, it is very important to have a pen and paper just handy to be able to keep up. Also, something that is very detrimental for remote interpretation, and it helps you set the tone, it would be a pre-session. So doing this pre-session is really how you introduce yourself at the beginning of the conference, and the staff will learn to expect it. The parent obviously doesn't know that this is something that is going to happen, but you will set the tone for the interpretation by letting them know how things are going to happen, and also so they're not surprised. It's already something that can be a little what is the word? I can't think of the word. I'll come back to that later. But it's just too many people. It can be just too many people. So knowing ahead of time, someone explaining, hey, I am an interpreter. I am going to be your voice. I am going to keep all this information confidential. I am not going to let anyone know this information. We're going to keep it right here. I'm going to raise my hand if I need to clear a term. We're going to take turns. I need you to pause after every 2 to 3 sentences, 3 to 4 after a few sentences. So the parent knows what to expect. The staff knows what to expect. And it gives a flow to the conversation. So I think that is one of the most important things. Education is something that you always, like Anna said, there's never enough information. You can never know enough because in the educational field, you're always growing. I mean, there's always new strategies. There's always new strategies that the teachers are implementing with the students. There's a new program now. Now there's a new class. So you have to little by little become more familiarized with the new strategy. Like, okay, like they're using this word now. Okay, it means the same thing as another word that you were using like maybe 20 years ago. So it's just like you have to always continue to work on your education, under your terminology, and understanding these different concepts, understanding psychological terms. It's just very hard. It's really hard to interpret psychoeducational evaluation if you don't understand what they're saying. So it is very important for you to actually know the meaning of these diagnoses, to know the plan of care, to be able to actually address or interpret accurately. Because if you don't understand the concept, if you don't understand the term, how can you relay that message to the target language? There's no way you will be able to do that. Working for different agencies, the scheduling is different. But the most important thing is effective communication really throughout all the stages. Before, during the meeting, after the meeting, you have to stay communicated with either the agencies, if you're working through agencies, if you're working straight with the schools, then having your point of contact and communicating before the meeting, after the meeting, during the meeting, as in if you have any technological issues. Also, you need to be very aware of your time. A lot of these meetings can take so much time, and some of them can take a shorter period of time, but because special education, you're going to be dealing with federal documents, because that's what an IEP is. And an IEP is a individualized educational program. So this is a federal document, and it can be transferred from state to state. So it is whenever the information is being reviewed, you will have to sign at the end as a participant. Sorry, I am running out of breath. Anyways, I get really excited sometimes, and I just start talking really, really fast, and then I run out of breath. Anyways, but being just very conscious of your time. That is something that you want to do. You want to be very conscious of your time, because sometimes, for example, every 3 years, they do something that is done. It is called a triennial or a reevaluation. So a child has to be tested to see if he will qualify for this. He will continue to qualify for the special education services. So this is a meeting that is obviously going to be more extensive than just an annual review, which is just the yearly progress review. That would probably be just one hour. So depending on the services that the child will have, it's how extensive that those conferences can get to be. So just be very mindful of your time before you schedule those conferences. Just know what type of meeting it is. If you know the approximate time, what kind of family? Sometimes your school knows, like, this is a family that is going to need more time. So it is nice to work from home, because it allows you to have that flexible time. It allows me personally to take care of not just my kids, but to take care of my parents as well. But it also, it has to be very scheduled. It has to be scheduled. You have to plan ahead. You have to book for your book ahead of time, pretty much. Also, your billing, you have to take care of your billing. You have to go ahead and invoice. Different agencies will do it in different manners. Some will ask you to maybe just fill in counter forms after your assignment. Others will ask you to send an invoice every certain amount of time. So different agencies will do different things. The feedback from your agencies, I think, is very important. Ask if they're not giving you feedback. Ask for the feedback. Know what they're how you're doing. There's no way you can improve your skills if you don't know how you're doing. Maybe you think you're doing great, and there's so much growth that you still have to do in certain areas. We all have to grow in certain areas. Some of the challenges that I've had has been with attendance, with some of the families. Actually, we see it a lot in our community. A lot of no-shows for meetings, but I've noticed that a lot of that has been usually due to confirmation. I work with one of the agencies that actually has us as interpreters confirm with the parents when we schedule and a day before. And with that agency, I've had 100% all of my assignments. All the parents have actually shown up, so I think that has definitely helped. The setting, again, working from home can be great, but it's a double. It's a I'm thinking of the I'm thinking of the saying in Spanish. Es una espada de dos filos. It's a double-sided sword. So um so yes, like maybe it is great, it is flexible, but guess what, maybe my kids are fighting in the background. Maybe I have to like mute myself and just make sure that they stop. So make sure that your environment it is the best for you. I think that is, and the rewards really, it is the networking for me. This is a this can seem like a very lonely job, especially if you're working remotely. So networking with other interpreters that are doing the same thing, it is just detrimental for you to just either just continue to expanding your knowledge together, maybe about different school programs, different forms or vocabulary. And the flexibility, again, that's another reward, and the pay, because working for yourself, it's better than and less for me than working for a public school. The pay is it's much higher. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for me. That's just a small glimpse into like what I do in a regular basis. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was wonderful. Wow. Between you and Anna, a wealth of information has been shared. We'd love to invite you students to put your questions in the chat. And then once we see them, we can have you turn on your microphone and your camera if you're comfortable with that. And if not, no problem. We can just answer your questions in the chat. What I love about this presentation is that it kind of went from the macro to the micro. So, Anna gave us this huge overview that talked about, the work of SeSo, but also their contribution to the field with, developing the standards and the ethics and the implementation of those. And then, how to sort of, how to go about getting into this field. And then we heard from Jessica on, kind of the nuts and bolts, like what it's like every day from the reality of if you are working at home, the importance of those, pre-sessions where you really establish kind of all the game rules with the parents and all the members of the committee that are there. And it sounds like there are a lot of challenges, but what I'm kind of hearing is that there are equal amount rewards, and that it's hard work. There's, thinking on your feet and the mental gymnastics, but being able to know that, a family has been relieved because they were able to count on you, and they trusted you to relay very important information, about their child. And one of the great things for me that is the takeaway with this is that it seems like there's a vast, variety of fields and settings that one could work in. They touched obviously on the medical field, and then Jessica more detailed about the educational field. I was in Costa Rica once on vacation, and I was studying at a school because I like to do that while I'm traveling. And a woman was there. She was French, and she was there taking I think in Spanish it's called the DELE exam. So it's a certification. As a French national, she was getting certified in Spanish because she worked for the United Nations as a translator interpreter. And so I thought, wow, that I hadn't thought about that as much as I'm, around multilingual people. Wow, yeah, there are translators, interpreters who, take it to that highest level and work at the UN. And then there are people who are making, impacting and making differences every day, within families' lives. So that's kind of the exciting thing, is that you can work in such a vast array of settings and fields. So I'm looking in the chat to see if we have any questions. And if you don't have a question but a comment, please, put that in there as well. It looks like Brittany has a question. Brittany, if you are comfortable with that, you can unmute yourself and turn on your mic and ask your question.
I can do that. Ladies, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us, but I want to, as the session draws to a close, and things on a lighthearted note, if I may. So I'd like to know about the funniest or most awkward situation you guys have been in involving misunderstandings or just some funky translation interpretation thing that has happened within your careers.
Oh my goodness. Brittany, I need more than 5 minutes. I could probably write a book about all the things that, all the mishaps, number one, that all the mistakes I've made as an interpreter, because I had no idea what I was doing. You know, this was just something I did for my family. So here I go, right? But I think, I'm hoping I won't offend anybody, but you know, in Spanish, like I mentioned, we have a lot of variation. And so I was in a parent-teacher conference explaining to a parent about, you know, their child just not putting in the effort and not doing their homework. The mom was from Mexico, I'm from Colombia. And so we were explaining a lot of that information. And she said something like, you know, es que es un huevón, which in Mexican Spanish, in some areas of Mexico, because not all areas of Mexico, that word means lazy. In my Colombian Spanish, it means not lazy, something that's actually a curse word that we would never use on a child because it's too cruel. So, you know, my face turned red, purple, everything possible. And I was trying to figure out as an interpreter how to remain professional. So I had to stop the conversation. I said, you know, I asked the teacher, I told her, I said, you know, the interpreter has a question. I need to clarify what this word means to the parent. And so we realized that even if we spoke the same language, it does not mean that we understand each other. And some of you are writing, yeah, the word cake in Puerto Rico, you don't say that to other people. If you, if I ask you, those of you who speak Spanish, how to say straw in your Spanish, wherever that is, you will come up with about 20 different versions of that word, of the word straw. So yeah, Spanish could be a little bit tricky, but I understand that, you know, Arabic and Chinese and many other languages we have different difficulties. So very good question. But Jessica, I'm sure you have many, many more.
Yeah, it's just all these translations that I've seen. That there's one at a school where I was working at, where they actually asked for them to bring, and I don't remember how exactly it was worded in English, but what they put in Spanish, it was just a Google translation, and it ended up being bring a goat or something like that. So the parents were super confused, and then it's a rural area, so they're like, do they really want us to bring goat? And what they were meaning was money. So it was just one of those just confusions. But I think the biggest comical thing for me, first of all, I was known as the snitch in high school. That's what I was not liked in high school at all. And not when I was in high school, but in just the high school that I worked at, because the students never wanted me to interpret for their parents because it was always a different story. So it was, the version of their story was always just so much more different than mine. It's like, well, this is not what you were saying. And sometimes they would try to interpret on top of me. So that was, I think it's more the situation that is comical than the actual wording itself.
Yeah. And I think we've had a couple of kids who have told their parents that F in their report card means fabulous. So we as interpreters come in and clarify the whole situation. So yeah, we've had some kids who are very creative with language. But Colby, you're asking an excellent question. The majority of translators that work for SeSo are native English speakers or bilingual from a young age. I would say that most of the folks that we have, of course, have learned their home languages. They have completed their education back home. And so they have had to learn English as a second language. So they're much, much stronger. I would say 99% of them are stronger in their home language then, well, I mean, they're strong in both, but they feel more comfortable with their home language because they came here as adults. So I don't know if that, I wonder if I'm answering your question or if you were asking something different.
I think we'll hold it there since it's 1 o'clock and I want to respect everyone's time. So thank you both so much, Jessica Sanchez and Ana Solar, for sharing your time with us today, your expertise. We learned so much. I knew a lot about the fields of translation and interpretation, but gosh, I learned a lot today. And I think one of the things that stood out to me is, you know, the importance of diplomacy, because yes, if you find yourself in those situations, which are probably not very funny when they're happening, right, and they're kind of uncomfortable, and you're trying to remain professional, you know, it takes a certain amount of, you know, being delicate and using diplomacy. So again, I want to thank you all for participating today in the Global Career Series. And I want to remind you that we have added a new session. It's the final session. The next one is on Thursday, March the 25th from 2 to 3 p.m. And it will feature representatives from Thomas R. Pickering Foreign Affairs Fellowship and Charles B. Rangel International Affairs Programs. And the registration links, as well as the links to those websites, are being put in the chat right now. Also want to add that videos of previous sessions, in addition to this one and the future session, are available and will be available on the Atlanta Global Studies Center on their YouTube channel. And that link is also in the chat. And we would like to thank our partner, the Atlanta Global Studies Center, for initiating this series. And we hope that you'll join us for that last session on March the 25th. Again, thank you for attending. And this concludes today's program. Thank you again to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.